Well, as we move on in our study of the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, we're picking up the conversation in verse 19. And I was thinking about it. I thought, what am I going to title this particular two passages that we're going to look at here, verses 19 and 20? And I came up with the thought that I'm just going to call it the basics. And when I thought about that, then I thought about something else that somebody shared with me not too long ago. They said, the word Bible, what it really means, it's an acrostic, says basic instruction before leaving earth. Basic instructions before leaving earth. And I thought, that's really, really what it's all about. What are the basic instructions that you're following on a day-to-day basis? So that when I read my Bible every day, I open up and I go through these chapters, and I have the ability, the opportunity to be able to spend a lot of time reading through the text and doing a lot of background research and stuff. But the thing that I find is that it just becomes a defining moment, not only for the entirety of my life, but for that day. I've suddenly anchored myself in something that is bigger than I and more important than I am. And it reminds me of what my basic purpose for being here is all about. And it's to know this word and then as best as I can to apply it to the various situations and circumstances I'm going to encounter, because I really don't know what's going to come my way. If you're like me, I get surprised all the time. And the biggest comfort that we have as followers of Christ is knowing that God is in control. And that therefore, it's not that I live out of control or without concern for control, because disorder and confusion, we're told by Paul, is not of God. So what am I saying? Well, I'm saying that it's this realization that I know that God wants me to live a well-ordered life. And basically, his scriptures instruct me on how to order my life according to his will. And the reason why that's so important is because it is foundational to everything. Foundational. For example, in verse 19, he says, by wisdom, the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding, he set the heavens in place. By his knowledge, the deeps, that's talking about the oceans and the seas, were divided, and the clouds let drop the dew. In other words, he's talking about the whole natural order of the physical universe. It was created by God according to his plan, according to his purpose, according to his laws. And it's held together by those same things. As Paul told the Colossians, he said that by Christ all those things consist. They're not only created by God, but they're also consisting by the will of God. And will continue to consist until the time in which God says he'll just, kind of grind them up like a crumpled piece of paper and throw them away. I mean, the point is that God has created the universe, and He's laid out before us this majestic order and beauty that we see all around us, to be a message just saying, if I know the number of the hairs on your head, don't you think I know how to help you get through this tax situation you're facing or this business situation you're facing? I mean, if I know when a sparrow falls from the sky, don't you think that I know that you're going through a very difficult time, maybe a relational conflict or breakdown in your life? Don't you think I know about that? You see, that's the whole idea, that once we accept God as being the creator of everything, and then we begin to understand how incredibly complex and profound that creation is, so far beyond even human ability to comprehend, despite the fact that some people try to pretend that they comprehend the complexity of the universe. It's so complex that honest men will admit we don't even grasp the smallest aspects of it. But to say all of that, at the end of the day, when you realize that God is that big and in that control, you can begin to take that confidence down to the moment that you're in and the situation and the problem you're facing right now. And so not only does it mean that you recognize that God's a creator, you respect him and the laws that he put in place for that purpose. In other words, I respect the laws of gravity because I've experienced falling down. I mean, I'm like everybody else. I remember one time I had a ladder going up a tree. I was trying to trim this pine tree in my yard, and all of a sudden I pushed with my saw, and suddenly I went backwards. Now, fortunately, I wasn't really hurt. God protected me, but I realized that when I fell off that ladder, I wasn't going to fall up, I was going to fall down. And so from that point on forward, I began to be much more careful. I want to respect the laws that God's put in place. When God says that if you sow to the flesh, you'll reap corruption, I have learned to respect that if I do corrupt things, that it will take a toll on my life, and therefore I don't want to do that. The minute I begin to sense that there's something corrupt or wretched about what I'm thinking or doing or even saying, I find myself pulling back and going, oh no, because this is like seed that I'm putting in the ground. It's going to come back to haunt me. I don't want that kind of garden in my life. And so it's that idea that I not only recognize the natural order of things, I not only recognize that the 10 Commandments express God's moral law, but I respect God's moral law, that I don't want to have any gods before him. I don't want to disrespect my parents or be covetous or adulterous or dishonest and all those things that he warns about in the commandments. I don't want to go there because I know that they are inviolate. In other words, they don't change just because I want them to change. And if you look at the chaos that we're seeing in our country and around the world today, the reason is because you've got people who are trying to violate God's law. And they pretend, and they may do all sorts of crazy things, from surgeries to chemical injections and all this kind of stuff, to kind of change the divine order, particularly the fact that God made man and woman and not something in between. As somebody once said, he declared them Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And people who try to go against that and saying, well, that doesn't apply to me anymore, it's just a matter of time before they're going to reap the consequences of that choice, that decision. That's why we warn them, not because we want to control their life or have mastery over their life. We warn them because we know that those things have consequence. You cannot mock God. And that's the whole point. When you don't respect God's laws, then you're mocking God's laws. And so as a result, you're going to find that you're going to sow to the flesh, and what you're going to reap is something that you regret, and that's something that could be devastating. Because what we find is that when we begin to recognize God is the Lord of the universe, and we seek to live our life in coherence with that, the end result is that there's a certain rhythm to our life and a harmony that our life takes on. You see, when we disobey God, when we begin to operate under the premise of self-will, I want what I want and I want it now, what we find is that there's a dissonance that begins to enter into our life. And you know what dissonance is. We have various examples. Some people, if you take your fingernails and drag them down a chalkboard, will just go completely crazy. I had a granddaughter who couldn't stand the sound of somebody chewing. It just drove her crazy. And, for those of us who are chewing, I couldn't hear myself chewing, but she could certainly hear it. And you find that these dissonant things are things that just kind of go against the grain. It's like, rubbing the cat the wrong way, or even trying to give a cat a bath. I mean, good luck with that one. But these are kind of things that we realize that we're going against the natural grain of life. And as a result, we're finding ourselves having dire consequences. There's a dissonance, and that's why if you've ever gone to an orchestral concert and you listen to the musicians all tuning their instruments individually and separately, it's cacophonous. It's just a bunch of noise, and you think, if this is any indication of what this concert's going to be like, I'm going to get out of here now. But suddenly you find themselves all coming under the authority of the director. They're looking at the music. They're playing the music the way it was intended to be played. They're following the pattern and the directions of the master. And as a consequence, it creates this amazing harmonious interplay of sounds and notes and instruments that kind of leave you in a state of awe. It's really hard to even pick it up from a recording. It's something that has to be experienced live. And because when you not only hear it, but you can feel it. It's my whole issue of why I like, pianos rather than electronic keyboards, because with a piano, you actually feel the sound waves being moved by the hitting of the keys. Just my opinion. But the whole point is that there's so much dissonance in our world today, and the reason is because people are working so hard to make the world into what they want it to be. And they actually believe that somehow they can ignore the Creator and ignore His laws and not have negative consequences. And so you look at their lives, and their lives are a train wreck. And what happens is, because it isn't working for them, then they get angrier and angrier and angry, and they want to burn down and tear down and destroy everything. But it all starts when they simply say, my will be done. And I'm not going to pay any attention to God's will. That I'm not going to recognize him as the creator. I'm not going to recognize that he made the universe and there's a law that he has put in place, both not only in the material universe, but he put a law in order in the spiritual and moral universe as well. And that when I live in any kind of disobedience, whether it's jumping off of high buildings and thinking I'm going to float, or if it's me simply thinking I'm going to change my gender because that's what I want to do, or because I think somehow that will fix me and make me feel better about myself, it's never going to work out well. It's going to be a disastrous situation. So anyway, I hope that was clear. Blessings, and I'll continue as we go on with verse 21 tomorrow and end our week on that. Okay? God bless you.